This is not breaking news. This is not a scandal. This is not about one person. This is about a system that stops working quietly. And then, all at once, what you're watching is not chaos. It's pressure escaping from a sealed container built over years, ignored on purpose. When people stop arguing about rights and start arguing about survival, something fundamental has already failed. Not loudly, administratively, economically. Power still speaks. Weapons still exist. Orders are still given. But legitimacy has begun to thin, not vanish. Thin. And when that happens, the danger isn't just internal collapse. It's who notices and who decides to help. Stay with me. Because the most important part of this story isn't the protests you can see. It's the mechanism underneath them and what it pulls toward the surface. If you leave now, you miss where this actually goes. And it goes faster from here. The system isn't run by speeches anymore. It's run by numbers, prices, exchange rates, supply chains that no longer behave. When a government loses control of meaning, it leans on force. When it loses control of money, force stops being enough. What actually governs this moment is not ideology, it's arithmetic. When wages lag behind prices for years, when currency collapses faster than trust, authority doesn't disappear. It hardens, and the system adapts in a very specific way. It stops responding to citizens and starts managing risk. Not public risk, regime risk. That's when surveillance replaces dialogue. That's when connectivity becomes a threat. That's when the economy stops being something to fix and becomes something to control. This is why personality doesn't matter here. Faces can change. The mechanism doesn't. And once a system reaches this phase, pressure doesn't release upward, it travels outward toward neighbors, toward rivals, toward anyone watching closely. That's where this starts to accelerate. Because the shift you didn't notice already finished happening. This didn't begin with crowds. It began with normalization. Slow changes, barely visible, each one survivable on its own. A little more expensive, a little harder to plan, a little less predictable. Before, people argued about the future. Now, they calculate the present. Before, frustration was episodic. Now, it's continuous. That shift matters more than any slogan. Because when instability becomes routine, people stop expecting relief. They start preparing for endurance. And endurance changes behavior. You stop saving. You stop trusting timelines. You stop believing promises that require patience. This is how a society quietly crosses a line without an announcement. The danger isn't sudden collapse. It's adaptation to decline. When a system teaches people that tomorrow will be worse than today, obedience stops being rational. It becomes conditional. And conditional obedience is fragile. It holds until one ordinary pressure feels unbearable. That's when the story stops being about grievance and starts being about thresholds. And once thresholds are crossed, they don't reset. They propagate. Then something specific broke, not in a square, not on a campus, in a place built for transactions. Shops closed, not symbolically. Economically, the engines of daily exchange went silent, not out of ideology, out of arithmetic. Prices had outrun wages for too long. Currency had lost meaning. Planning had become guesswork. When trade stops, a system feels it immediately. This wasn't protest theater. It was circulation failure, and the response came fast. Mass arrests, lethal force, connectivity cut. The system treated an economic signal as a security threat. That's important because it tells you what the system fears most. Not dissent. Disruption. Information went dark. Coordination became dangerous. Visibility itself was framed as sabotage. If you're still watching, stay, because moments like this are often misread as the climax. They're not. They're diagnostics. They reveal what no speech ever will, what the system protects, when everything else is negotiable. And once a system chooses force over flow, it commits to a path that narrows fast. From here, every move costs more than the last. And that's where the real danger begins. Here's the part that's easy to miss. The system didn't fail suddenly. It rerouted. When resources shrink, power doesn't disappear. It concentrates. Money stops circulating outward and starts pooling upward. The state doesn't collapse. It hardens into a gatekeeper. Access becomes conditional. Imports, currency, connectivity, even employment. Who benefits? Those closest to allocation. Who absorbs the damage? Everyone else. This is how economic pain becomes political control without a single new law. Scarcity turns loyalty into currency. Compliance becomes survival strategy. And repression stops being ideological. It becomes logistical. The system doesn't need belief anymore. It needs predictability. So it trades growth for control, stability for enforcement, future capacity for present dominance. That's the mechanism underneath the violence. Not madness, not panic. Rational preservation of a shrinking core. But there's a limit to this design because every layer of control removes flexibility, and systems without flexibility don't bend under pressure. They transmit it outward, sideways, eventually beyond their borders, which means what looks internal never stays that way for long. Pressure compounds, force increases. Arrests scale, signals harden. Connectivity fractures, work stops, movement becomes risk. Every response is heavier than the last one because retreat now would expose weakness, and weakness travels. So the system doubles down. Threats replace policy. Punishment replaces negotiation. Silence becomes strategy. At the same time, something else happens. Attention arrives. External, strategic, interested statements, warnings, options, under review. The crisis stops being contained, not because of sympathy, because of opportunity. Internal instability creates leverage. Leverage attracts players. And once that door opens, control no longer belongs to just one set of hands. This is where timelines collapse. Decisions that once took months get compressed into days. Mistakes accelerate. Signals misread. Red lines blur. And the space for correction narrows to almost nothing. Because now every move is interpreted twice. Once by the people inside, once by the actors outside. And those interpretations do not align. From here, even restraint can look like provocation. Here's where this stops being abstract. Because this system doesn't press down on society. It presses down on you, on your rent, your food, your ability to plan next week without guessing. When prices change faster than paychecks, every decision becomes defensive. You delay, you ration, you compromise in ways you didn't before, not because you've given up, but because endurance has replaced hope. This is what systemic failure feels like on the inside. Not dramatic, exhausting. And when survival becomes the dominant concern, fear loses its leverage. Threats work only when people believe returning home is safer than staying outside. That balance has shifted. If you're watching this, don't look away here. This is the point where stories usually skip ahead to outcomes. Stay with me. Because what happens next is shaped less by courage and more by how many people decide they have nothing left to protect. That calculation spreads quietly. And once it spreads, no announcement can stop it. It only moves forward. This is no longer contained by borders. Economic collapse inside one system doesn't stay domestic. when that system is strategically positioned. Markets react, supply routes tense, allies recalibrate quietly, because instability here doesn't just threaten governance, it threatens balance. Energy flows become political. Shipping lanes become conditional. Regional deterrence becomes unreliable. And suddenly, what looked like an internal breakdown starts distorting decisions far away. Not out of ideology, out of risk management, every neighboring actor now has to ask not what they want to happen, but what they can afford to let happen. That's how internal pressure creates external motion. This is why attention intensifies before outcomes are clear, because no one wants to be late to a system in transition. But transition without direction is the most dangerous phase. Signals conflict, alliances hedge. Red lines exist only on paper. And when multiple actors prepare for different futures at the same time, coordination collapses. That's how instability spreads, without intention, not through invasion, through anticipation. And anticipation accelerates everything. From here, the system isn't just under stress. It's under observation, which changes how every next move is made. From here, the system accelerates toward one of three directions. The first is adjustment, limited recalibration, partial relief, enough economic oxygen to slow the bleeding without surrendering control. This path requires restraint, internal compromise, and time. Time is the problem. The second path is erosion. Control holds. Legitimacy thins further. Pressure never releases, only redistributes. Protests don't vanish. They fragment, they resurface. They normalize. The system survives, but weaker, more brittle, more reactive. And then there is rupture. Not a single moment, a sequence. Economic thresholds fail. Security responses overreach. External actors miscalculate. Rupture doesn't look like collapse at first. It looks like acceleration without steering, decisions made too fast, signals misread too often, force used where flexibility was needed. The danger here isn't regime change. It's loss of control over the change itself. And no one, inside or outside, fully controls which path emerges. Because once pressure reaches this level, intent matters less than timing. And timing in systems like this is rarely chosen. It arrives. This is where I stop explaining and start warning, because systems like this don't announce their outcomes. They reveal them in hindsight. What looks stable today may already be irreversible. What looks chaotic may already be decided. The danger is not that something happens, it's that it happens before anyone admits it's underway. Every actor involved is watching the others for a signal that will arrive too late to control. And you don't get to opt out of that dynamic just because you're far away. Economic shocks travel. Security decisions echo. Misjudgments compound. If you're still here, don't treat this as a story about elsewhere. Treat it as a case study in how modern systems fail without collapsing, and how quickly that failure can spread. This is not the end of this story. It's the narrowing. What comes next won't be shaped by speeches or statements or promises of action. It will be shaped by pressure, meeting opportunity. And that intersection is where history stops being theoretical. Stay with this, because the next phase won't wait to be understood.